To start with, let me say that this is not going to be a very interactive session because I was not familiar with this format. So I'll just be standing here, you'll be sitting there, and you'll be getting to ask questions at the end. Let me explain to begin with that I'm wearing these two hats right now. I work for the European Centre for Development of Vocational Training, which is a European Union agency. And at the same time, normally, I work for VOX, which is Norwegian Lifelong Learning Agency. But I'm seconded from the Norwegian government to the European Union work. So this is, I'll go back to the Norwegian job afterwards. My major focus for today will be the Norwegian development of RPL, and then a little about Europe. So if you're only interested in Europe, I suggest you come back after about half an hour to hear that, because this is going to be Norway first. I'll give an outline of the national system and take a look at recent developments, what's happening, and what are the challenges. So most of the session, it's a Norwegian hat today. At the end, there'll be some time for questions, if you still have the energy, so we'll get there, hopefully. But first, I would like to try to get some local facts in place. How many of you are Canadian? All of you? Most of you, apart from the Australian? Yeah, okay. Normally, I start by saying Norway is such a sparsely populated country. You know, there are hardly any people there. And it's true. There are 5 million people. We've got 385,000 square kilometers, meaning 13 people per square kilometer. But then I looked up your facts, and it was no fun, because you have these 33.5 million people, as you know, 10 million square kilometers, meaning 3.4 people per square kilometer. So I can never use that opening again. It's ruined now, from now on. You have more than 6 times the population of Norway. You're number 36 in the world in that respect, and Norway is way, way down the list as number 114. You've got more than 25 times the area of Norway, and you probably know that you're the second biggest country in the world. You all know that. Whereas Norway is number 62. It's bigger than Japan, it's bigger than Germany, but alas, it's smaller than Sweden, and we regret that. So if you look at the standard of living, if you look at the BNP per capita, it's fairly good. For you, it's $40,200 per capita, putting you somewhere between Sweden and Switzerland. For Norway, the BNP per capita is $59,500 US dollars, which leaves us between Brunei and Kuwait somewhere. It's the oil, you know. The unemployment rate is low in Norway. It's 3.4%, which is quite low. In the EU, to compare, the average is 12%, and it's massively much higher than that in many countries. For Canada, the rate right now is 6.9, I think. Yeah. Looking at the PIAC results, you score slightly lower than us, so we're sort of even there. And then we have, I think I have to add that we have very high taxes, but then we have a very free education, including university. So there are some differences. But I think to set the stage, this is nice to look at some of these facts and think that, you know, in Norwegian minds, Canada is sort of popularly seen as like us, fairly well educated, fairly well off, in a fairly cold country. I think that holds true. So to get to the business, the outline of what I'm going to talk about is first the big picture. On the one hand, the policy and the legislation which is underpinning RPL in Norway, and on the other hand, is traditions and cultural and social background things that also influence the view of learning. Then I'll go on to look at RPL in the education sector before discussing the 2 other sectors that are big on learning, namely the voluntary sector, what we call the third sector, and working life. To conclude this Norwegian overview, I'll summarize with the challenges that we see and then move on to developments in Europe. So this is where it all starts. In 1999, our parliament there says that it asks the government to establish a system that gives adults the right to document their non-formal and informal learning without having to undergo traditional forms of testing. Now, this has sort of taken many different forms, but that's what it says to begin with, and it's nice to get back to that when people get too hung up on written documentation and all that kind of thing. And it says here, without having to undergo traditional forms of testing. So we can refer back to that. At the same time, there's a lot of text here, but I'll go through it. This is no coincidence. At the same time, there was the so-called competence reform, which was an agreement between the social partners, and it transferred into the government's work. We have a very strong tripartite governance back home. Through this agreement, the ideas about RPL were first formalized and put into politics, and it's very visible, the result. One of the most visible and most important results is the legislation that resulted from these processes. There are two main strands in the work. One is building an RPL system. The other is securing adults that they have a right to education. Even if they've dropped out before, even if they haven't had it before, they have a right to a personal, individual right to get primary and secondary education for free. All this has been supported very strongly throughout all these years by all the stakeholders, especially the trade unions and social partners, employers' organizations and industry organizations, and the voluntary sector, because the voluntary sector is an important player in Scandinavian countries. At strategic level, I'd say that interest in lifelong learning has just increased, interest in differentiated opportunities also for adults, for immigrants and other people. This has just grown over the years. So this is a sort of development that's been going on for these last 15 years. And the major objective is to get people quickly out to work, of course, or recognize what they have and then out to work. But it's also a strong element of, it's also got a strong element of personal development and individual development, which we'll look at later. So you will understand that especially the social partners, as I said, are really keen to get experience and learning recognized, which does not come from the traditional formal education institutions. So if we look at policy documents and white papers over the last maybe 6, 7, 8 years, it would be fair to say that RPL is a natural ingredient in this lifelong learning picture. If we look at the actual legislation, there are these points here. There's a right to education, there's a right to validation combined with the education, there's a right to going directly to the trade certificate exam without teaching, if you can, there's a right to be admitted into higher education, and there's a right to exemptions from modules or parts or whole modules or courses in a higher education program, all based on RPL. I say RPL, is that okay with you? You understand me? Yeah, good. Then there's the social and cultural background, this learning picture, sort of wider and less definable picture. I'll just look briefly at that. There's a quite strong consensus on RPL and learning as a good thing for a variety of reasons. Historically, we have a tradition for popular enlightenment. You've probably heard about Grundtvig, maybe. The folk high schools is quite strong focus on the individual right to learning. And of course, also the labor movement would have had this strong focus historically with study circles and non-school types of education. It's a right for all. It's been like that for a long time. It's a sort of natural thing. And then there's a very strong trades culture, meaning that learning from outside school has a standing. There's an acceptance that unacademic learning is also good, where RPL is a natural part, of course. Then there's this element of mutual trust between the stakeholders. It's not as if the trade unions and the employers' organizations are enemies. Well, they are when they negotiate wages, but in these questions, they are really on the same side, I'd say. because education is for the common good. It's good both for the company and for the people who work there. And they're very much involved in these kinds of policies. The other important element is that we have a well-structured nationwide public system which caters for initial education and also picks up people at a later stage if they need that. And there's this attitude that it's never too late to come back into education. Then we have demography. Demographic factors must be mentioned. I think in most of Western Europe it's the same picture. People get older, there are fewer young people. We have also a skills shortage, so we need to have all hands on deck. Like, we need to take out the full potential of the working population. Women are already there, almost 100%. Immigrants, seniors, everybody needs to join the workforce, so we need really to get this upskilling through RPL is really important for us. And then, of course, the last point there, we're not alone in the world. We are quite clearly influenced by others. We try to find the best models for lifelong learning. We take part in international work and projects. We go to conferences. And, of course, there's Europe. We're not members of the Union, but we're still part of Europe. So there is a sort of common backdrop to this, which is cultural and which is also in these principles. There's a set of shared principles that all sectors agree on. For an RPL process, it should be like this. It should be voluntary, it should be beneficial. The individual has a quite strong position in this. The processes should be transparent and it should be in line with what's happening elsewhere. And there's also agreement on what it's good for. You know all these things. There's career development, changing jobs and all that, different ways of going in and out of education, and the personal development factor, which I think is quite important. There's this holistic tradition again, that it's good for you. It's also good for the employer. So the employers are quite keen on personal development. They will say things like, it doesn't really matter that people don't progress in their job, but they feel so much better. Yeah. Well, this is overdoing it, but this element of personal development is quite strong. Let me add that these opportunities and rights and benefits are promoted locally and nationally through the trade unions, through the county authorities, and through my agency, which is the national sort of overarching agency for lifelong learning. I'm getting around to talking about the practical world. This is what it looks like. This is, let me say that our RPL system is linked to the educational system completely, very strongly, very closely. You know, you have to have common standards, and we just said the common standards in our case is the education system. That's the standard. That's where it sits. That's where everything is. Because it's such a small country, you know, and such a unified system. To understand a little more of what I'm going to explain about the system, I have included this brief look at how education is administered. At the bottom there you see the compulsory school. It's primary and secondary school, lower secondary, and then you have upper secondary. These two are administered by different levels of administration. We have a two-tier administration. The municipalities take care of the obligatory school, and then the upper secondary is taken care of by the counties. There are 19 counties. Adult education belongs to either, depending on which level it's at. And then there are the universities over here, like you probably are familiar with. They are autonomous. They report directly to the ministry. The others will report to the Directorate for Primary and Secondary Education. And if you wonder about my institution, it's not there because it has no influence, or it has influence, but it has no power at all. We just sit there as a sort of advisory body somewhere beside the Directorate, I think, at that level. I've marked out the counties a little because, I don't know, you can't see it, but they are responsible. They have a special responsibility for RPL processes, which they are not always too keen on. So this administration governs this system, which, as I said, is homogeneous, it's integrated, it's free. And up to the age of 16, everybody goes through a common set of courses. There are no choices. Well, there are some choices, but very few options of, you know, moped driving and so on. Following the cohort, you follow your cohort all the way through to 16, the first 10 years. And even at upper secondary level, there's a fair bit of integration between the vocational training and the general studies. For example, the theoretical subjects are integrated, the exams are the same for the theoretical bits, and then of course you have a huge chunk of workshop and practical work and practical sort of theory, practical theory in the vocational training. I put 2 + 2 because it's 2 years of school and 2 years in apprenticeships in work. And then you can take a trade certificate, or you do that, people do that. It's possible to move sideways in the system. In general, you need a general study admission certificate from the general studies to go into higher education after these 3 years. But if you take the vocational branch and you change your mind, you do an extra year of general studies and then you move across to higher education. There's a tertiary vocational education, which needs a trade certificate to get in, or RPL. And then there's higher education, and these two are sort of parallel. You can also move from tertiary vocational education into higher education in professional programs like engineering, for example. So RPL happens in this system in many different ways. But the standards, the things that you measure competence against is the curriculum. For the obligatory school, it's a national curriculum. For the upper secondary school, which is not obligatory, it's also the national curriculum. But these national curricula are different for vocational education. They are developed together with the trade boards and the county-wise trade boards, and very much in cooperation with the industry. So it's not a school thing. For tertiary vocational education and higher education, there are local curricula changing from school to school or institution to institution. So they do their own thing. If we look at how this actually, or whether it actually happens at all, we have these numbers just to give you a little idea of the scope. We see that adults, these are adults who are in the system, and 14% of the RPL, of the total of the students in upper secondary are adult RPL students. The higher you get, or the higher up the system, the fewer the RPL students. In tertiary vocational education, there are 7%. It's a very small kind of school. It's got 14,000 students nationally on the whole, and about 2/3 of them are men, so this is very much a kind of further education opportunity for tradespeople. And then universities and university colleges, only 1.4% are RPL students. They are the ones who are qualified, and twice as many applied for this kind of entrance. I got the new numbers just today from my agency, saying that from 2011, these are from 2010, 2011 to 2012, the number of RPL applicants has increased by 23%, which is quite a lot, in higher education. And this will be schools recruiting. They're recruiting people for engineering, nursing, economics, and social sciences. Those are the main areas. About half of them were qualified to enter, half of those who applied. So this was the education system. We're going to go on to start with the biggest success. This is upper secondary level. This is the trade certificate education. The legislation says that from the age of 25, if you're an adult, you have not completed your secondary education, you have a statutory right as an individual to get your non-formal and informal learning validated and recognized towards national curricula, and an adapted education to fill the gaps. It doesn't say there, but that's part of the law. So this is quite a good thing, and it is used quite a lot. In practice, we chose in our country a regional approach, because we have regional authorities in the counties, and they will have responsibility. So what's really exciting is that right now, or maybe after Christmas, the Directorate of Education has or will issue a set of guidelines saying RPL, remember, is an individual right. And this is 10, 12 years after the law came, so we need to reinforce that. It's a responsibility of the county authorities to realize this right and to assure the quality of the process. So funding is delegated to the 19 counties to do this, and there are regional centres in each of the counties. The guidelines also include recommendations, but no requirements on training. So you are recommended to do training as an assessor, but it's not required. So the assessors are normally teachers, or they can be tradespeople who come in from outside to do assessment of a specific trade. But what I find also interesting is that they focus on methods here. They say the methods will have to be varied and fit for purpose, because what we'd seen was that there was a trend towards saying you have to document things in writing. You have to have written documentation, certificates, you know, diplomas and things. But it says here that if you rely on written documentation solely, it's not good enough. You're not doing a job. You have to talk to the learner. There has to be some kind of interview, dialogue, something with the learner. You can't just say, send in your papers, because it's not good enough. I also find it good that they underline again that even if the national curricula are the criteria, it doesn't mean that we're looking for identical competence. It's equal competence. It's not the same. It should be something similar, something equally good, but not identical, which is a really important point to make, because if you have a curriculum, it's very easy to sit there and just check off, can you do this, can you do that? That's not the point. The point is to do a real assessment, a holistic assessment in a way. Also, of course, it's underlined that the documentation equals a school result. What you get is a diploma, which is as good as another diploma. There's not a sort of B variety. And of course, they say again that the process should be good for the learner, should benefit the learner, it should be voluntary, all that. So some counties, some of these 19 counties in this long country do that very well. They have tailor-made processes, they have follow-up measures, they take people in, they do these wonderful jobs with them, but others don't. And to make sure that it's not unfair and that practice is equal and the quality is good in the different regions, that's part of the intention behind these guidelines. So we're quite excited to see how much force will they put behind, because they're guidelines and not regulations, they are not legislation, they are guidelines. So we'll see. This is a new thing, it's very exciting. If we look at this over time, I'd say it's a success. We've had a lot of people, to a scale of more than 70,000 in total, go through this process at this level since it was established. 80% in vocational education and training, so that's where most of them are, particularly in health and social studies and construction. The health and studies people are, we see a lot of adult women there who've been in health services for years, and they formalize their experience and become certified. Let's see. So far, there are no statistics on the results directly in the form of better employment or money saved or things like that, but we have these individual success stories. So we haven't really managed to track what happens afterwards in hard facts. But we see that certificates, having an upper secondary certificate is almost a minimum requirement today to get a job at all, to be at all employable in Norway. So you could say that that people actually get these certificates increases their chance of employability and also more flexibility to change jobs and move around in the work market. And of course, if you ask people and get these personal stories, they are overwhelmingly positive. We interview employers, we interview participants, we interview assessors, and they report back to us that This is a very positive experience, it's very useful, it has a very good effect on people, they get more self-respect, all these things that people will report back after the assessment. But of course also you find in these kinds of surveys there's a major need for training of staff. People, assessors, want to know what they're doing right and what they should be doing better and that kind of thing, and also quality assurance issues. So before leaving this section of the upper secondary education, I want to point to this last little figure there, because there's an increasing focus on career guidance in our country right now. Only yesterday I heard that the new national budget with the new government for 2014 will provide funding to help develop a master's degree in career guidance, which we don't have. So that's a great thing. It's, millions of Norwegian kroner will come our way. We're going to develop it together with higher education institutions. So things are happening at policy level, and it's obvious that there are links between RPL and career guidance and the possibility to create an individual learning pathway. So this is what we work with in our agency, and we try to inform national policy development to these connections. Right, we move on to, to RPL in tertiary vocational education. These are highly specialized technical courses over between a half and 2 years. So it's a wide variety of different kinds of things, ranging from flower decoration to really highly specified technical maritime subjects, like everything to do on board a ship, whatever, machinists kinds of things, that kind of thing. We have the responsibility for keeping track of the development in this kind of school, so we had a national survey. There's a law here also since 2003 saying that you have a right to be validated or assessed with a view to enrollment. If you don't have a certificate from upper secondary, a trade certificate, you can get in anyway. So we had to ask the schools or the institutions, how many did you validate last year and how do you do it? Which was quite interesting, because the results said that 10% of our students in these institutions would apply on the basis of RPL, and once they'd applied, they were fine. 94% of them got in. Then again, only 57% of the institutions do this, meaning too few, I think. And there's huge variation. We see some have very few RPL students and some have a lot. Now, this was anonymous. We don't know about the 100%, but it's quite interesting. They've got 33 students, I think. And this might be, for example, a highly specialized course which requires a specific work background, nail design maybe, something like that. I don't know. We don't know because the schools are anonymous. But some of them are really small. And these are quite interesting institutions because they've had sort of an anonymous life so far, but now we have a national council for vocational education at this level. So they're beginning to get together as a kind of known entity. Can I say that? Yeah? People know that they're there, and the government knows that they are existing. So that's a good thing. Right, we move on to university and university colleges. We have quite a lot of university colleges spread out across the country. We have about 5, 6, 7 maybe big universities, and then the other 60 plus are quite small. Some of them have 300 students if they're out in the outskirts. So since 2001, people who have not completed secondary school at all and have no certificate, they can enter higher education on the basis of RPL if they are over 25. The reason for this limit is that there are other rules applying to youngsters. So this measure, this opportunity was evaluated by researchers in 2006, and they say it provides a second chance for non-traditional learners and learners from disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds especially, and it's a foundation for their successful completion. So that's a good thing. But there are also considerable variations between the universities and university colleges. How they have adjusted to this kind of legislation, the key factors being geographical location, supply of students. As I said, university colleges in rural areas with low numbers of applicants are in general much more positive, much more willing to try new approaches and more flexible. But I'm not saying that this is an easy way in, because there's no evidence to that. The big universities in Oslo, for example, everybody wants to go there. They have a sky-high applicant rate, so they can just lean back and say, we take the best. So there's a big difference here. But this is all about enrollment, which is not such a big problem, because the thinking is we can always let people in. Exams will show if they can cope. So it's no problem, just let them in. But we wanted to find out about exemption, which is much more of a challenge. There's also a right, as I mentioned earlier, a right to be exempted from parts of a study program or from a full course. These procedures are all local because the universities are all autonomous, so they do what they want, but they have to stay within legal limits, of course. Exemptions is a whole other story, because what you do there is you vouch for a person. You say, this person does not need to take my lessons, or this person does not even need to sit the exam. I say that he's good enough or she's good enough, which is more risky in a way. So we asked about the scope of that and the methods of that, and we found these quite interesting results again. Almost all the schools answered, or the universities, but these are the results. This is for exemption only. It's seldom used, the demand is low, and there's little or no information to the learners. So if the demand is low and there's no information to the learners, I would say there's a connection there. There's very much uncertainty as to practice and to use of resources. There's a lack of incentives, and people are worried about the workload and the money and all these things. So we got talking to the sector. That's the advantage of being such a small country. We can talk to the sector. We can just meet people. They wanted guidelines. They wanted good examples of procedures. So we started some pilot projects this year. It's funded by Vox, my agency, and they are to deliver results by Christmas, which is also quite exciting to see what they're ending up with. We started the 1st of January, so they got 1 year. People also wanted to know what the others are doing, the other schools in the regions, what are they doing? Because they don't talk to each other. I mean, apparently they don't talk. So we did that. We facilitate for meetings and networks and things. So we had some regional seminars. We had a big national conference now in October, and they just love it. Apparently they need somebody to get them together. So our agency is taking that role of facilitating for these meetings and seminars and regional things. Now the law is there, and more I think people feel that it's a bit embarrassing. You can't just go on ignoring it. They feel bad about that because now the ball is rolling and people are talking about these issues. And if you just pretend the law is not there, you're going to make a fool of yourself, I think, in the end. Right, we ended up with, lately, a lot of work making these guidelines then for admission in tertiary vocational education training and for exemptions in higher education. We strive to place responsibility with the staff. To keep text to minimum, to be very practical, to encourage local versions built on these. We give people Word files if they want to. They can build on that. To give hands-on useful advice. So for the education sector, I would say, let me see. Yes. No, we're not quite there yet, but things are happening. And we're quite optimistic. You see that the guidelines for the upper secondary are finally coming from the directorate. These guidelines are coming. People are discussing this. There was a huge participation at the conference in October. And, we've sort of revitalized, I think, the question, because it's been around for ages, but it's sort of been dying a little, and now it's back up. which is really good. And it's very hard to ignore that kind of development. Right, the voluntary sector. This tradition for popular enlightenment that I was talking about at the beginning is based on principles of life-wide and lifelong learning, the potential of the individual, the belief in equal opportunities, all these wonderful principles. It's got an enormous scope. Adult learning NGOs in Norway organize 37,000 courses a year for 490,000 participants, which is 10% of the population. And they cover a broad range of themes. That's why I put this folk dancing guy there, because they do that. They do folk dancing, they do Latin, they do carpenting, they do everything. The principles are the same. This should be voluntary, and this should be, this should be for the good of the individual. But it's very weakly regulated, this sector. They're used to doing what they want, and they have an umbrella association organization saying, do what you want. We try to work with them, but there is little progress because it's all voluntary. It's based on people's voluntary work. It's possible to map the competence, but it's not compulsory, and organizations choose what to do. They have capacity issues, of course. It's all voluntary. And it's very sporadic, the use of documentation towards RPL processes from this sector. But, we want to work with that, and they have some pilot projects in their own sector trying to get a kind of consciousness around the importance of actually documenting things. Then there is working life, which is hands down the biggest sector for learning. So why is it so hard to grasp? That's the question. It is the most important sector. I mean, recent surveys say that this is where adult learning happens. So everybody agrees on the principles. RPL should be voluntary, should be beneficial. Everybody agrees on that. Everybody agrees on the benefits, the employers, and of course the employees, that this would be good for you to document your knowledge and to have it validated and so on. And it's even in the basic agreement between the social partners that it's important that the enterprise has a system for this. But often it doesn't happen. There might be time and money issues. We have very small companies. 85% of the companies are really small, less than 10 people. Nothing is really coming out of that sector in the way of documenting for validation. But then I put ministerial working group there right at the bottom, because that's another quite exciting prospect. The ministry has now invited the social partners to the table to explore and suggest possible solutions on how to make competences from working life visible in the national qualifications framework. Because it's been criticized heavily for being centered on the education system and reflecting only that. So now the social partners have their chance. And I can't think that this will not influence RPL also, because it's all about making competence visible. And there are lots of questions about on whose terms this work will be and all that kind of stuff, but this is a start. And I think this is where the social partners must actually sit down and say, what is it we want? We talk about these competences that are invisible. What are they? How can we get them? How can we show them? How can we put them into the national qualification framework? This is going to be a very interesting group to follow, I think. They've got a 2-year mandate to solve everything. I put the guy with the snowplow up there just to remind us that it is quite a challenge with the sparse population, the very small one-man companies. Now, how do you get hold of this guy and have his competence validated when he works at night and, all these things. So this is my conclusion for Norway, the challenges. We have challenges, we have a system, we have some success, we have legislation, but there are challenges. I'm quite pleased to say that I think attitudes are there's a quite widespread attitude that learning can happen outside of school. If you don't talk to the academics, this is a widespread attitude. Learning can happen outside of school. So that's a good thing, and it shouldn't be underestimated. The thing is to try and turn not administrators in higher education, but scientific staff. That's the people you need to turn. Because the administrators, they are all with us already. Awareness is a challenge in the sense of making these opportunities better known. Less than 30% of workers know that they have these rights, so there's work to be done there. There is a challenge, it's a challenge to improve cooperation across sectors and levels in county administrations and so on. For example, unemployed people do not use the opportunities on offer. And then, of course, county level authorities for public employment and for education should cooperate better. Quality assurance is also an issue to develop methods better and for training of staff. But I think it's a bit difficult to explain, but the Norwegian system is very much based on mutual trust. It's such a small country. We have this highly trusted, unified public education system. Everybody believes in that. So many of these questions really rely on our trust in the system. Because this is education. This is our sort of little world. And if people say there's so much happening on the outside, they need to show it. And they need to suggest other standards, because the other standards, that's what we are expecting from the labour sector. These other standards that are not the curriculum for VET. What are they? Where are they? What are the suggestions? So this is an important point, I think. We need to be better at documenting from working life and from the third sector or the NGOs. And of course, in education, lots of things are happening, but it needs to be more uniform so it's fair. I mean, it shouldn't depend on where you live in the country. So more information, improve cross-sectoral cooperation, quality assurance to secure fair practice, and, you know, important to get equal treatment for everybody and a universal understanding of what this is. And I think these guidelines, now we have 3 different sets of guidelines, one for TVET, one for higher education, and one for upper secondary, will help to push these questions, I think. Are you still with me? Yes, good. Because I have 17 minutes. I'm going to jump over to Europe, just very elegantly, I think, with this picture. Not these. The greater picture from our perspective is Europe, which is quite small, really, but Norway is not a member state. We follow European policies, though, quite loyally. There are 28 member states right now. There are 5 candidate countries: Iceland, Montenegro, Serbia, Macedonia, and Turkey. And there are 3 potential candidate countries, which are Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo. So I don't know if you see that from here, but it's a very important power factor in European politics. You probably know that. And even if we're not members, we have to comply. We have to be seen as doing what they're doing, because if not, it will be hopeless. We have this European Economic Area arrangement, which means that we pay. We pay to trade with the EU. And this also means that we abide by their rules, more or less, but we're not members. So I'm now donning the European hat, and we'll look at these things. RPL in the EU. There are some central documents. We'll be looking at the old guidelines from 2009. We'll be looking at the new recommendations that came right before Christmas, the connection between the two, and this is our framework. These are the main documents that govern RPL in Europe today. And of course, these are connected quite closely to the National Qualifications Frameworks work that's also ongoing, but I don't think I can digress into that now, because that's a whole other story, a huge story. So before looking at this framework, I want to say 2 words about Cedefop, because some people have been asking about that, where I work now. It's an agency. It works on supporting development of vocational education training throughout Europe, contribute to implementation of European policies, and VET, vocational education training, meaning in a very broad sense. Also lots of continuing education, adult education, everything to do with validation is in this agency also. So the aim is to strengthen European cooperation and to make sure that the Commission's policy is supported and implemented and the Member States get necessary support. So development of tools and organizing things for people to get together, collecting evidence, lots of statistics works going on. Cedefop makes a big thing called the European Skills Panorama, I think, which is a skills survey forecast thing for Europe. What kinds of skills are going up and down? What will it be like in 10 years? This kind of thing. We have a role in this work, of course. We'll look at that later. So to take the guidelines first, they are a result of work in peer learning clusters, which means that the origins lie with the stakeholders. This is part of the policy framework in a way, but it's a practical tool. But it's the first time that you get an official document which pulls together all the perspectives on RPL and gives it a practical angle. So it's reached a very wide audience and it's been very influential since 2009. It's more or less the reference for all stakeholders. It rests on the same principles that all European countries agreed on in 2004, how RPL should be. And it's the same principles with, transparent processes and voluntarily taking part and all these things. Right, the guidelines look like that. They list the principles. They have perspectives at various levels, from the European and down to the individual. The guidelines outline something about processes and methods and what practitioners should be able to do. And they have practical things like checklists for auditing your processes and that kind of thing. I have somewhere, I think outside, some flyers where you'll find the web address to go and download this if you want to, because it's on the website. It can be hard to find, so I should give you these handouts. If we go on to look at the recommendations, and this is a bit complicated because this is the official Council document addressing the Member States, saying you should do this, you should do that. They can't say you must do this because it's within the education field, everything is voluntary. The EU doesn't decide for everybody else here. But they say you should do it, and then it's sort of must. But it's not, officially, it's not must do. But this is the Council laying down the law as far as they can. They can't really, but this is what they do. They really signal commitment here. They set a date. It's quite interesting. By 2018, arrangements are to be in place to give opportunities for validation and for people to acquire qualifications on this basis, full or part qualifications. The relation between the two documents is that the guidelines came first. They're a tool, but they've been around to influence people for 3-4 years, and then these recommendations are building on that. And there are other strategic documents on RPL in Europe, so this is a kind of cumulative development process, and it ends up with these recommendations. We're really pleased about that, because this is a very strong signal from the European Commission that this is important. Recommendations are not to be, it's not like an unimportant document. The Commission will support the process. They will do things to help people implement this, and these are the ones that are listed there. Facilitate for peer learning activities, meaning seminars, conferences, and that kind of thing. They will revise the guidelines, and they will revise the European inventory, which is a repository of country facts. The principles, just take a quick look. I think the things you don't know from before, will have to do with the links to the NQFs, the use of the EU tools, the use of the credit systems that are already existing in the European Union. The rest of them, you know, I think these are general principles for RPL. I'm trying to speed up a little now to give you the chance to ask questions. What I think is important to mention is that the recommendations will say things about the procedure, but they will also say that these are general things. Please make your own arrangements. So these elements should be included, and then they list the sort of general outline of the process, but there's an adaptation clause. So what we do in the countries is that we take this and we make this. This is what it looks like for Norway. It's all in Norwegian, so don't bother to try and read it, but it gives you an idea. You have the general principles of the recommendations, then each country, each national setting will need different things. And this is what we need for higher education. You see the student can opt out very early up there. He chooses to go through the full course instead, for example. So this is the kind of thing that this is meant to happen. You know, you have the general framework and then you do this in your country. My last point is what is Cedefop doing in all this, and they do the work in a way. It's an agency. So it's drafting the guidelines revision, having it out in the consultation with stakeholders in Europe, then doing the actual revision, doing the revision of the inventory, organizing peer learning activities, and monitoring processes in general. The inventory will be quite interesting, I think. It will be, well, it's already there, but it's being revised now. So it gathers country examples to support the guidelines. So the guidelines will say, you know, the process could be like this, or should be like this, that, and the next thing. And your examples then link to the inventory. Here are examples from different countries at this level of the process, or in this stage of the process. So I think this kind of targeted exemplifying what the countries are doing to the different stages, for example, in the process or to staff development, will be quite good if we get it the way we want it. It will be quite practical. It will hopefully be quite accessible and easy to use and easy to compare between the countries. This is what we're trying to do. Okay, this is me getting there. These are the central documents. Of course, there is a dramatic, ugly background to this, which is a tremendously high youth unemployment in European countries. All these changes that makes this even more urgent. Even if European politics is a large machinery, it's still quite urgent to get something up and running to try and cope with all these enormous challenges. And RPL is a vital factor. You have strategic targets about education. We have systems, there are systems for RPL, but they need to be improved and they need to be implemented across Europe. So I'm putting my email address here and website for further reference. So I want to thank you, and we have 5 minutes for questions. If you could please, when you ask, speak slowly, because there's something about the sound in this room. Yeah? The European Skills Panorama is a different thing. That's statistics on what will happen with different jobs, you know, as a kind of forecast. Whereas the inventory is just a set of facts. Each country will deliver their facts about RPL and some case examples. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering is there a process leading towards allowing professionals to practice from country to country inside Europe?
Could you say
inside for professions, let's say doctors, engineers, well, there's different cases. is there a process leading towards mobility inside EU?
I don't really want to answer that because I'm not I know that there's something going on, but I don't know what it is.
Okay.
I must say I've only been with this job for 2 months, so I don't really know everything. But I know that there's something going on. I can't say what it is.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah? Oh, there's somebody there. Sorry.
Hello, I'm wondering why you decided to make the admission age 25 in Norway?
It's because up to that age you are included in other sets of legislation which has to do with young people. So after 25 you're sort of out of the youth rights kind of environment. So that's why there's a limit of 25 years of age.
Does this mean that if you're under 25 and very competent, you can't be recognized in Norway?
It means that you'll have to go into youth programs, because there's this distinction of 25 is that you have to have some acquired work experience, and if you're under 25, you hardly have that, because then you belong to the sort of school system in a way. That's why. Oh, that was not very clear, was it? Did you get that, or will I try again? Okay.
Yes, I had the good fortune to be in Oslo with my wife. She was presenting at an international conference there, and I was able to bring... at a conference, I think it was in 2002, 2001 in Oslo, and I was able to bring all my PLER guidebooks and handbooks for faculty and students, and I had the good fortune to be able to talk to one of the VPs in the large Oslo University, and asked him about, so do you have anything like this? And he was shocked, actually, and he said right point blank, no, we don't. If you want to talk about that, go down again to the private business school down the street, and they'll deal with that again. And so I'm pleased again that there's something, they're moving ahead, but I can understand again the shift. It's a monumental shift at the higher education levels in Oslo. So.
Well, it's very hard to shift higher education, I must say. What you say is right, especially the big traditional universities are really, because they don't see the need. I mean, if you sit at a small college out in the sticks, you need students. This is a way to recruit non-traditional students. If you have enough students and they're really good, why would you care? And there's no financial incentive. So this is still the picture, unfortunately.
Hi. In Canada, we actually have a growing problem of underemployment of university graduates, combined with a shortage of people who have skilled trades training. And I'm just wondering if you have that situation in Norway, and if so, does it affect your appetite to try to shift that higher education system?
We have that situation. I think, from my point of view, we educate too many short higher education, short cycle higher education kinds of people, middle degrees in a way. And there is an overproduction of that kind of education, whereas there's lack of skilled tradespeople. But we import them from Poland. So that's how we solve that for the moment. I think as long as the unemployment is so low, it's not a problem because people get jobs anyway, and people drop out of studies, they still get jobs. But if the unemployment were to rise, that group would be a problem, I think. Okay, I think we'll just call it a day then. Thank you.